All right, welcome everybody. My name is Cheryl. I'm an adult services librarian here at the library. Thank you all for being here tonight. Tonight we have Adam Sawyer, an outdoor and travel writer, photographer, published author, guide, and public speaker based in the Northwest. Locally, he has written stories for numerous publications. He is also the author of several guidebooks, including Hiking Waterfalls in Oregon. His weekly Substack newsletter, Collecting Sunsets, covers a broad set of topics including grief, addiction and recovery, travel, and the healing powers of nature. Let's welcome Adam Sawyer.
Thanks for being here. So, a couple of things before we get going. As I was mentioning to some folks prior, I'm accustomed to kind of showing lots of pretty pictures and talking to you directly in my presentations. However, because tonight is a series of my own essays along with accompanying photography, I'm going to kind of just be reading to you today for the most part. When I do start an essay, I'll give you the title of the essay and you'll know that it's over because it'll just be like a black screen. That's the best thing I've been able to come up with so far, because sometimes when the essay is over, I will look up and give you kind of my thoughts and feelings or how I've processed or some behind the scene things about it. But occasionally I have notes on it and I want to make sure that I communicate those exactly how I want it to communicate them. So sometimes you'll see a black screen and I'll still be down here for a minute, but it'll all settle in as we get going. Once we're done, I'm going to show you a couple of things, how you can access the essays that I'm reading tonight, as well as more where they reside online and kind of what I'm doing now. I'll also have a couple of books. I've got Urban Hikes Oregon, which is like a travel guide kind of for hikers, and then Hiking Waterfalls in Oregon if anyone wanted to buy. Guidebooks telling you how to get to some of these amazing places that I'm going to tell you I cried in today. And then I am happy to hang out and chat a little bit, but I've also noticed in giving these presentations, they are a little bit draining for me. So I have no problem hanging out and chatting for a little bit, but if you had any sort of really extended feedback or a story you wanted to share, please do. I'll have this up at the end. Feel free to email me. I've gotten some wonderful emails since I started this, and I actually talked to some amazing people about some amazing things that they've experienced, and that helps me too. So we'll talk about all of this at the end. For now, let's go ahead and jump into it. Okay, so tonight's program, through a series of essays, photos, stories, anecdotes, and interludes, details how my time spent with Mother Nature and in the outdoors of Oregon has allowed me to grieve and help me heal from a series of significant setbacks and devastating losses. I would like to make clear that I am not a counselor, a therapist, a doctor, life coach, or educated or accredited in any way. What I am is a man who, like any of us have or eventually will, suffered significant loss. I've also been lucky to find myself in the somewhat enviable position of being able to spend an inordinate amount of time in the outdoors to help deal with the loss and the pain. And that's what I've done, and I write about it a lot. Nature combined with writing allows me to somehow conceptualize and process it all. There isn't anything new or groundbreaking in the essays I've written about the outdoors and grieving, but they have been helpful for me, and even some others who I've shared them with. And whether you are currently grieving or not, I hope you might be able to cull something comforting, thought-provoking, or otherwise useful from them as well. Many of the essays this evening detail specific, intense emotional chapters in my life, from my recovery from heroin addiction to the catastrophic loss of my life partner Kara, our cat Leela, and our off-the-grid home to fire over a year and a half ago. As a result, I may choke up. I might need to take breaks. I may sob. You might factor into some of that as well, and that's okay. I'm here for it, and I hope you are too. But if it turns out you're not, that's also okay. Grief can make us feel uncomfortable, even though it is natural and unavoidable, but it is also navigable, and I aspire to express that here today. I'm also going to be touching on some of the other ways of experiencing and approaching time spent with nature, and some additional benefits of the outdoors, even when you can't actually make it outdoors. We'll get to that. The essays I'll be reading this evening will be in sections: the desert, the mountains, the backyard, and the coast. Tonight we begin with the desert, my appreciation for its beauty and solitude, and my then recently deceased father's admiration for the same. There are parts of eastern Oregon that rank among the least densely populated in the country. And one might assume that the lack of popularity is based on a vacuum of picturesque or cultural points of interest. And that assumption would be dead wrong. Now, I'm not going to attempt to make the case that there aren't some desolate spots out there. There most certainly are. Though even in those instances, one could argue that beauty lies in the eye of the beholder. Regardless of what your stance on the scenic value of sagebrush might be, it is often in the corners of the bleakest landscapes where we find the most uncommon natural beauty, in addition to solitude. These are two things that I place a very high value on right now. And it makes me grateful for the fact that there are parts of the Oregon desert that could be described as solitude incarnate, while simultaneously qualifying as some of the most alluring landscapes I've been privileged to occupy, as typified by the Alvord Desert. Standing out on the cracked earth of the playa, while looking at a snow-capped Steens Mountain reach toward the bluest of Oregon skies, was one of the most connected to this earth moments of my life. And without another sentient being in any direction for as far as I could see, it was as if Mother Nature had struck a tuning fork, perfectly modulated to the pitch of my soul, that I felt resonate up from the playa and through my entire body. But being in a place such as this is currently the ultimate double-edged sword. I find myself in a bizarre purgatory of needing or being consumed by aloneness. I desperately require seclusion and solitude much of the time, especially in nature. However, if I'm having a bad day or feeling despondent, it is a searing forsakenness, especially in nature. Because that's where many of Kara and my most treasured moments together were born. And now, the more dramatic the landscape, the more awe-inspiring the setting, the more it stings that she's still not here to share it with. But I've discovered that that's just where all aspects of the used to be reside now. Whether it's our shows on Netflix, the dishes we used to make together, or the hikes we used to take. It's all bittersweet, and I suspect that it always will be. Though certainly more visited than the Alvord Desert, another personal favorite is the John Day Fossil Beds National Monument. My father was a Harley-Davidson enthusiast and had spent much of his retirement touring the country by motorcycle. He'd been to Oregon, but only traced the edges of the state by taking I-84 along the Columbia River Highway and 101 down the coast. When I shared photos of the Painted Hills with him for the first time, he was almost angry with himself. An avid fan of deserts in general, he was disappointed by his own assumption that any real scenery to be found in Oregon would be forested or coastal. So for years, I would torture that poor man regularly with photos from the east side of the Cascades. And when he passed a few years ago, I took a pilgrimage with Dad riding a Spirit shotgun to all 3 units of the Painted Hills in an attempt to honor his wish to see them. When I arrived at the Blue Basin within the Sheep Rock unit of the monument, the weather was moody. I decided to hike it all, the Outlook Trail, and then finish with the short but iconic Island in Time Trail. I would well up numerous times along the way, trying to simultaneously conversate with the old man while holding back tears. A restriction, by the way, which I will no longer impose upon myself. Then I came to a sign that read, "End of trail, proceed no farther." Shortly thereafter, the skies opened up and so did I. The walk back to the car was as emotional as was wet for a number of reasons. Not only was I feeling my father's presence, but I found the sign metaphorically moving in a few ways. I would think about that sign from time to time and all of its potential meanings, but nothing ever congealed to the point of being put on paper. It could also be due to the fact that at that point in my life, I wasn't super comfortable with the thought of grieving. That all changed when Kara passed and it was more or less forced on me. But I'm also far more receptive this time around. Perhaps because I'm finally old enough to recognize that processing all of this in a healthy way would be critical to survival. However it happened, I finally put my thoughts about that sign into an essay by the same name. This is called "End of Trail, Proceed No Farther." What are you supposed to do when you reach the end? I suppose that depends on what we're dealing with specifically and any number of contributing factors, doesn't it? Whether or not you've truly arrived to determine this is something that needs to be assessed on an individual basis. Sometimes it's cut and dry. It is obvious that you can proceed no farther, or at least you shouldn't. And sometimes you can plainly see no harm in continuing on, or have some existing knowledge that lets you know that this particular red light might technically still be green. And other times it's as difficult to discern as anything else you'll encounter on life's journey. For example, some hiking trails reside within extremely delicate ecosystems or in busy day use areas, where off-trail explorations, be they rare or frequent, can cause or are actively causing significant damage. While some paths come to an end in verdant, thriving wilderness areas that are far more resilient and equally less wandered, where hidden treasures that take the form of things like waterfalls and swimming holes are the booty to be had by those who continue to traverse. But what about the end of a relationship, or what looks to be anyway, or the end of a life? Not just for the person whose mortal trek has ended, but for the loved ones who remain standing at the viewpoint where their journey together ceased. Who goes farther or further now, and how? I recognize that this is some highly individualized existential stuff. And from my current perspective, I'm not so much concerned with the what happens after we die angle as some of the other timeless questions in there. We are all traveling along multiple paths congruently at any given point in our lives. The path that was our life together has come to an end, but I know we don't stop there. Though the terrain looks sketchy, confusing, and unfamiliar to me, I've seen countless others navigate similar stretches. I've watched them walk straight up to and right on by that end of trail sign. If I'm going to do the same, I just need to be mindful of my footing, take breaks, keep my bearings. Because while the path technically ended, our journey together will continue in one way or another until my own comes to an end. And who knows after that, I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. As for my own personal path, it's not uncommon for winter storms to leave obstacles across trails. It's also not terribly out of the ordinary for hikers to encounter massive, uprooted trees where a trail once was, forcing them to create one or more user paths through or around the jumbled mess. These paths can be circuitous, and they are never pretty, but they get you to the other side of the damage, and that's where I'm at. Following in the steps of others at times, but also finding my own way when I see a route that better suits me. While it's certainly a little rocky, exposed, and extremely unpleasant to look at as of late, it assuredly gets better up ahead. I know that I can proceed further. So, that was actually the first time, that trip to John Day was the first time I used the outdoors or nature as a means of helping me to process or deal with grief, even though I didn't even realize that that's what I was doing at the time. That was my first foray into it. It got much more intense later on in life, as you'll learn here shortly. Up until that point, however, I had used the outdoors to a almost transcendent level to help me get past another hurdle that I'd encountered earlier in life, that of addiction. So let's go to the mountains. This was actually the Wallowas about a month ago. Just as my outdoor riding career began to flourish, I became addicted to opiates again. The first time when I was in the military. I was prescribed opiate painkillers for headaches. GI aspirin, we called them at the time, and I had a hell of a time with them. They eventually resulted in a felony conviction, the loss of my military career, and a 1-year prison sentence. Fast forward to Portland, Oregon, about a decade later, after being clean for all that time, and I'm smoking black tar heroin off a piece of tinfoil in the bathroom of a pizzeria I was working at part-time. I would eventually get into and out of a detox center. For the first of many times, I would turn to Mother Nature for help. These next series of essays are pretty rough. I've lost a lot of my favorite places, people, and pets to fire over the last decade or so. And it was in or near the mountains where all of these fires occurred. and where some very difficult but much needed perspectives were gleaned. This next essay is called Death and Rebirth on Vista Ridge. When I entered detox, stay on the same page. We'll start at the beginning of this essay. On August 26, 2011, a lightning strike on the north side of Mount Hood produced a smolder that would eventually ignite and become the now infamous Dollar Lake Fire. By the time autumn rains extinguished the blaze, it had consumed over 6,300 acres of forest. The mosaic burn pattern in some of the areas meant that the pioneering species of flora would eventually be able to take root and propagate at an accelerated rate. At the beginning of 2015, a 2-year dalliance with heroin had spiraled into full-blown addiction and transformed my life into a similarly decimated landscape. When I entered detox in March of that year, I had already lost my best friend as well as my girlfriend, and a hard-fought burgeoning career as an outdoor writer was being actively flushed down the toilet. After getting clean, I moved into a friend's house and began what I knew would be a painfully slow process. What the Dollar Lake Fire had done to the trees of the Mount Hood wilderness, heroin had replicated on my endorphin receptors. Recovery in both cases would require time and patience. Neural receptors can eventually be repaired. Luckily, one of the things that helps the process along is fresh air and exercise. The outdoors of Oregon is what inspired me to become a writer in the first place. Before losing my way 2 years prior, hiking had been my drug of choice. And it would now become a critical component in returning to health, but it was some tough sledding. I fatigued easily and wasn't getting the same mood boost that climbing a mountain or finding a new waterfall used to elicit without fail, which was to be expected to some degree, but it felt like I wasn't gaining any ground. It takes so long to feel okay, let alone good again, that having the patience to get to the other side is one of the hardest things about recovery. In the years since the fire, the forest was occasionally checked in on by hikers that formerly enjoyed a canopied Vista Ridge trail to an aptly named Eden Park. It took a few years, but eventually the avalanche lilies came. The ethereal white lilies seemingly push receding snowfields up mountains each spring. Not long after they were first spotted, spectacular carpets of countless lilies announced the rebirth of the wilderness with a floral roar, and it was a phenomenon I wanted to witness in person. So in late spring of 2016, I watched the hiking and wildflower forums with bated breath, and when someone came down from the mountain with the recon I'd been waiting for, I went. Somehow, among the scorched trees, life had come back in spectacular fashion. Bluebird skies, white lilies, and black snags produced a palette of colors and textures unlike anything I'd ever witnessed, and I was summarily moved to tears. In that moment, the parallels between the landscape and my life were simply too much to bear. That afternoon in June, Mother Nature put her hands firmly on my shoulders and told me everything would be okay. She said I'd feel strong again, find love again, and eventually be myself once more. She reminded me to take care of my body and soul and come see her often. I obliged, and she kept her promise. And today, I am eternally grateful for death and rebirth on Vista Ridge. So, what's interesting about that was the first time I cried in about a year since getting out of that detox, and it caught me off guard. And halfway into crying in the way that I described in that essay, those morphed over into tears of joy because I was so happy that I was feeling anything again, even if it was kind of sorrow-laden to some degree. And so that's something I hold on to this day and actually held on to tightly as I went through this next chapter that I'm going to detail, was that if you're feeling anything, if it's despondent, if it's sadness, if it's grief, if it's elation, happiness, pain, hunger, it means you're alive, and that's a gift. This next essay is called My Favorite Places. On August 16th, 2020, the Beachy Creek Fire was born from a lightning strike deep within the Opal Creek wilderness. By the time the blaze was completely contained at the end of October, over over 193,500 acres of old-growth forest, numerous structures, and at least 5 human lives have been claimed. Much like the Dollar Lake fire on Vista Ridge, there was some mosaic burning, but the Beachy Creek fire was exceptionally intense and destructive, particularly at its core near the confluence of Beachy and Opal Creeks, where the loss was total. It was home to an ancient grove of trees known as Cedar Flats, an area that contributed mightily to the career change and course correction in my life's journey. It was one of my favorite places on earth. In the early morning hours of February 25th, 2022, what is believed to have been an electrical malfunction triggered a fire at our home in the woods. I was safely away for work, but the fire escalated so quickly and with such intensity that both Kara and Leela were unable to escape and perished in the blaze. By the time it was extinguished later that morning, most of my home and its belongings were gone as well. It was unequivocally my favorite place on earth. I always turn to Mother Nature when things go pear-shaped, and this time has been no different. I know better than to seek answers from her, though. Rather, I'm out there hunting for perspectives. Among the many things that time spent grieving and healing outside has taught me is that not all of her cycles are equal, or by human empathetic assessment remotely fair. Some, like the changing of the seasons, are more reliable with regard to timing and execution, but others could be ambiguous and dependent upon any number of variables, both known and unknown. For an ancient forest, all but erased by wildfire, it can take centuries to grow back to a similar state, and depending on how that conglomeration of factors plays out, it's likely that forest will never resemble its former incarnation. In the interim, different, shorter, more readily observable cycles will be at work. That forest will again hold life, and there will be beauty in the regrowth, just in different, yet to be seen ways. Whatever the eventual outcome, it will most assuredly take time. It's a process that neither you nor I will see completed, and in some ways, it's a loop not meant to be closed, and I've learned to be okay with that. So I go out and I appreciate the things currently happening and anticipate what I know is coming. The countless new greens of spring, joining again in concert with the evergreens. The multicolored wildflower meadows in June. Bird calls, both foreign and familiar. Mother Nature seems to regularly take my breath away with the intention of filling lungs deeper. I'm also grateful for wheels in motion that I'm not yet aware of, cycles unseen, trusting that with every step, paddle, breath, day, year, an indeterminate measure of whatever, I am alive and moving forward along with all of it. However slow it may seem, make it through another day, collect another sunset. So, the title of either one of those essays could just as easily have been things I kind of already knew but didn't want to accept that Mother Nature crammed down my throat. Some of those things, everything takes time, its own time. You need to have patience. It's not all going to make sense. Accept those things, find joy when and where you can, and continue the journey. Take a sip of water. Let's go to the backyard. So for our purposes, the backyard is essentially your immediate environs. It could be your actual backyard, your local park, your local trail system, whatever's kind of your backyard. Rendered homeless the morning of the fire, I moved into my mother's one-bedroom apartment in Beaverton that day. It was not ideal, but I was thankful to have a place and a familiar face. I spent a lot of times visiting the park just 3 max stops from where she lived, the Tualatin Hills Nature Park. The 222-acre nature preserve is a diverse oasis within the city, with a series of trails that explores every corner. I would go there often, daily if possible. Nowadays, I still go to that same park once a week for a walk in the woods with my mother. You don't have to go far to experience nature or learn a lesson or two if you're open to it. This next essay is called Loosening the Grip. Sometimes I am overly aware of my walk, which seems especially odd for someone who tends to be comfortable in his own skin. For reasons unknown, if I'm walking down the street or through the grocery store, I'll at some point become aware of my step spacing, posture, arm swing, and it all feels wrong. I never noticed such things in the woods though, which makes sense, because I'm not really walking so much as ambling between stopped and first gear over uneven terrain, passively studying the flora and fauna and considering photo compositions. I will regularly travel between 3 and 10 miles on a trail, only to realize I'm walking again as I approach the car. It was different this morning. I'd had a few rough Cara days in a row and needed to be in the woods. So I went to the nature park around the corner from Mom's again. My goal was to make it to one particular spot where I knew I would have some chance to cry my eyes out in solitude, a place I know well, that I refer to as the grief bench. Unfortunately for me, my body cared not at all that I had plans for when and where I wanted to grieve this morning, and it began emoting once I was mere steps within the park. So unlike most outings, I popped it into second gear and began moving through the woods with a purpose. I had a place I wanted to reach before I lost it completely or encountered too many other hikers. It was at that point that I noticed my walk, which made me all the more uncomfortable. Ironically, the solace I typically find in the forest had been stripped away on a few levels and I unraveled. When I finally made it to the grief bench, the tears stopped, of course. I sat, wiped my face, and composed myself just as a handful of hikers walked by. I took a few deep breaths and began hiking again in the way I'm accustomed to. It all worked out. I very much got what I needed. Maybe a pair of lessons while I was out there. For starters, keep a loose grip. Don't white-knuckle the reins so much, because it's only when I'm trying to exert control that I begin to notice I'm walking. And also, grief doesn't really give a shit about my goals about when and where I think it should occur. It was also at my mother's place in the days and weeks following the fire that I discovered my own flawed thinking about getting out into nature and what my approach to it had been. For some reason, up until that point, I always felt like the dosage of outdoor healing or comfort I received was commensurate with the amount of trouble I went through to attain it. The further I hiked, paddled, climbed, or sometimes drove was in my mind going to produce greater, more measurable, or more profound results. And you could make the argument that hiking further means more exercise and fresh air, which is better. And the longer you're out there, the more time you have to clear your mind or ponder, sure. But it wasn't until I was at Mom's place that my assessment of all that changed. Hobbled by nearly constant knee or hip surgeries over the last several years, most of her time in the outdoors or communing with nature came via her front porch. Now I was going to the nature park a few short miles from her apartment where I was getting what I needed. Were the views as grand or inspirational as some of the hikes in the gorge, or an outing that ends with a poster-worthy panorama? No. And those are, of course, wonderful. That's why we go to them. And yet, without fail, I was always able to fill my cup, clear my head, or release every tear at the nature park around the corner. And it doesn't have to be a purpose or a goal to get outside either. You need not be in pain or suffering from significant trauma to be helped by or receive comfort from nature. You don't have to be an outdoors person or be in the middle of the wilderness where no one can hear your cries to reap the benefits of the outdoors. You don't even have to think about it. You don't have to try to engage it if you don't want to. Just be outside. You can study nature, and that's wonderful. Or you can simply allow her to study you, and that's helpful too. Let the sunshine trace the contours of your face. Let a bird call explore the shape of your ears before being lost to the wind and found all over again. The benefits of being outdoors improve physical and mental health. It's been proven time and again, almost without regard to wherever or however you are getting or engaging with it. Long story short, go outside. But even when you can't get outside, you can still be inspired by the outdoors. And we'll kind of get into that in this next section, which is the coast. So the coast kind of has my heart at the moment. After a few weeks with my mother, it's where I fled to after the fire, and it's where I currently call home. As a result, one of the essays in this collection is essentially a love letter to the coast, as well as the hotel I called home for several months upon my arrival. But we'll start with this. This is called Agates on a Windowsill. I don't know what you know about agates, but for you non-beachcombers, they are pretty beach rocks typically semi-transparent to translucent. Size-wise, more often than not, they range between a jelly bean and a jawbreaker. They come in various colors and compositions and can be quite fetching. A lot of them are instantly recognizable. They pop against the background of beach or darker rocks, while others require further inspection before you recognize them for what they are. I got interested in them when I moved to the coast and began taking regular and lengthy walks along the beach and began collecting the specimens I found to be the most intriguing. My mother asked me at one point early on, "But why? What are you going to do with them?" And after a few moments of reflection, the answer was clear to me. I plan on doing anything with them. Perhaps at some point return them from whence they came. But for now, if I'm able to source comfort from pleasures that are simple and reliable, when I need to, I can always reliably find comfort simply. When I started decorating my new place, I put the agates and other little beach treasures I've acquired since moving to the coast on a shelf in the bathroom. They look nice there, and it was as fine a place as any for me to keep them. A few days later, I entered the bathroom and instantly noticed a warm and intense sliver of sunbeam washing over the sill that lit up the agates like multicolored bulbs. I gasped, clutched my pearls. Some of the obviously beautiful ones became even more so when shined upon, and others only revealed their magnificence when given light or luminescence from the proper angle, and able to flourish under an agreeable set of circumstances. But when they did, they were stunning. I got lucky enough to catch the phenomenon a handful of times over the next several days. I even moved them around to see how others might look. But who knows how differently the sun will hit that window a week from now, let alone in late winter or early summer, or if it even does at all during certain times of the year. I've only lived in the new pad for a little over a month after all. The other day I was looking at them and thought, that's us right there. In some ways, we are all agates on a windowsill. At numerous points in our lives and in varying degrees, we get our moments in the sun. And right now, it would serve me well to strive harder to recognize those moments and appreciate them, relish them when they're transpiring. Not only because those poor rocks can't, but because you never know how long it might be before the sun hits you again, or how bright it will be when it does, or for how long. Or God forbid you get taken off the sill entirely before the sun gets back to you. I am happy to report that the sun hits that windowsill in all 4 seasons. I've lived there a full year. This next essay is called Walking Backward Against the Wind. Today, on what would have been her 41st birthday, I took Kara for a hike. It's the same thing I did last year when I took her boots with me to the summit of Neocani Mountain. It was only a few weeks after losing her, though, and it was pretty intense. I didn't know what I was going to do or how I was going to feel today, but when I woke, I decided that taking her on another hike is what felt right. Now that I live by it, I go to Cape Lookout a lot. Its natural beauty and begging to be strolled upon stretch of beach helped make it quite popular. But I figured a potentially rainy winter Monday might mitigate foot traffic, and I was right. Normally when I arrive at a trailhead and there are no other cars, I wonder how in the world I got so lucky. But the conditions this morning left no guesswork. I was looking forward to it though, for a few reasons. Conditions like the ones out there this morning are hardly what most people want when they go for a beach walk, which for my purposes meant perfect conditions for a walk on the beach. But also, I was kind of hoping that at some point it might get miserable. I'm not entirely sure why. It couldn't be that I felt like I needed to be punished for something or suffer more than I already have. Maybe it was because I knew it would keep everybody else away. Or perhaps it would make the experience more memorable or impactful. Or that any foreboding elements of nature would make her presence more palatable. Maybe all of that. When I started walking, it was quite breezy, and the sea was certainly angry. But it wasn't raining, and there were occasional splashes of blue sky. Regardless, there is no combination of atmospheric conditions in existence that can render Cape Lookout as anything less than majestic, despite whatever effects they may have on my physical comfort. And then the rains came. And boy, did they ever. The wind decided to kick things up a notch too, of course. And I began cursing myself under my own breath for hoping that a festival of fuckery such as this would manifest itself during the outing. I was about 2 miles down the beach when the skies opened up and I began heading back immediately. Thankfully, I was properly geared, multiple warm layers, and a waterproof exoskeleton. But it wasn't pleasant. Despite my hood being cinched down tight over the brim of my hat, I was still taking on a not insignificant amount of stinging sand and freezing rain to the face. At one point, I stopped walking and turned my back to the wind to give myself a break. And it was so much better that after a few moments, it dawned on me to just start walking backward against the wind. Sure, I wasn't moving nearly as quickly, but it definitely took the bite out of the storm. It also allowed me a respite and a means of finding a modicum of joy in it all. After this morning, I'll take her on a hike every year for her birthday. It's as good a way as I can currently imagine to celebrate her, and it also assists in getting me through the day. Besides, hiking is a proven method for me to help make a bad or uncomfortable set of circumstances feel a little more tolerable, like walking backward against the wind. I mentioned earlier that just the act of getting outside at all improves your health and mood, though I will take that a step further. I also believe that even if you are physically or emotionally unable to make it all the way beyond four walls, the great outdoors can enrich your soul. You're about to learn all about Room 5 in this next essay, but I want you to know before we get into the meat of it that there were hours, sometimes days, when all I could or would do is sit on my bed in Room 5 and look out the window at Nehalem Bay and Neahkani Mountain, only leaving my space on the far left side of the bed to visit the restroom or heat up a bowl of soup. It was that bird feeder on Mom's porch that helped her pass the hours. You don't have to be able to reach out and grab nature in order to be touched by it. So, I don't know if you guys can see down there on the island, but those are elk. And so, I will grant you that most people do not have a bedroom or kitchen window that looks out over the Nehalem Bay and Neahkani Mountain. However, I think my point still holds water, in that even if you can't get outside, whether physically or emotionally, mentally incapable of doing so, you can be inspired by it. So this was my view from Room 5. This was last summer. And this was one of those days when I just didn't have it in me to participate in life this day. And I just remember watching, it was the time of year that the elk came down from the mountains to calve on Lazarus Island. And during the day, the calves, which looked like full-grown Dobermans, would rest down in the tall grass all day long, occasionally see ears poke up, while the adults graze across the entire island, come back and check every now and again, make sure things were okay. But then at dusk every day, you see the heads start to pop up out of the tall grass. And they get up and start kind of trying to unleash all this energy pent up from all day, clumsily practice galloping and running and chasing each other, coming down to the water and jumping in and trying to get back out, playing reindeer games, as it were, you know? And I just remember being so inspired by that in so many different ways. I mean, one, just to see, again, as we've kind of touched on, the cycles of life, they go. Whether you're participating in it or not, life is going to keep moving forward. And it was also inspiring to see life kind of start fresh and start anew. And I knew that even if I wasn't able to kind of take part in life, my own life that day, I was inspired to maybe do so tomorrow. So this next essay is called Room 5. I met the owner of the old Wheeler Hotel, Katie, years ago while I was on assignment for a story about small coastal towns. I had the privilege of staying there for a night as part of my research, and I loved it all. The hotel, the town, and Katie. After the tragic loss of most of my world in early 2022, she generously offered to have me back for a respite when I could find my way out there. When I did make it, she gave me the keys to Room 5 and told me to hold on to them, to come and go as I pleased until the busy season returned to the coast some months later. That hotel immediately became my indefinite home. Many things helped me survive the months that immediately followed my partner's untimely passing and the loss of our home. Nature, writing, and perhaps most notably the love and support of friends and family. I do believe, however, that this particular act of kindness from Katie was as large a factor as any. I tend not to entertain much outside of the realm of the proven and factual. That includes things like astrology, religion, ghosts, and all forms of woo. That said, I am also agnostic across the board when it comes to such matters. I know that there are things for which no real explanations or answers have yet to be revealed. Accordingly, I try to maintain an open but skeptical mind. And I say all of that to tell you this. Katie was suffering from a significant personal turmoil several years ago when she decided to take an impromptu trip down the Oregon coast. On a whim, she stayed at the Old Wheeler Hotel, then stayed another night, followed by another. Then after those 3 nights spent in room 5, she decided to buy the place. 15 years later, she still stays in that room from time to time when life gets a little overwhelming, or she feels like some guidance might be needed. Make of that what you will. There are some obvious reasons for the room's appeal and ability to offer healing and peace, not the least of which is the view. The second floor corner space looks over what I lovingly refer to as the Nehalem Serengeti, a landscape comprised of the Nehalem River and Bay, Lazarus Island, the Sitka Wetlands, and off in the distance, Neahkani Mountain and her adjoining peaks. It is a view that provides instant comfort when I wake and limitless avenues of thought and contemplation, inspiration throughout the day and into the evening. My coffee cruises to the public dock at sunrise, followed by my wine wanders at sundown, have proven to be the finest regular bookends to a day I've yet experienced. Beyond the natural beauty and tranquility that the area affords, there's something magical about living in a historic hotel. I saw a quote a few years back, well, probably a meme, that resonates with me as a person who's spent a lot of time on the road. It goes like this. I really enjoy just existing in hotels. The long identical hallways, the soulless abstract art, strange city lights in the window, 6 stories off the ground, strangers chatting in the hall, nothing in the dresser. No past, but an infinite present. And I love that, and I would agree. I love staying in hotels for all the reasons that quote hints at, but residing in a hotel, let alone a very small, very old one, is an entirely different animal. Here, floorboards elongate or contract in order to compensate for ancient and uneven hardwood flooring. It's a place with so much soul and character that at times you almost have to work to ignore it. And there's something preternatural about being alone in such a place for the evening when no guests are present. There's a pleasant eeriness that comes from walking the low-lit halls, while the creaking floors and antique mirrors tacitly convey my course. They exude mystery and mischief at times, but with an undercurrent of good intentions. I very much equate it to spending time in the rainforests here. There are distinctive haunting qualities to coastal parcels of windblown Sitka spruce and shore pine forest, where one moment I could be walking cautiously through hobbit tunnels cut into thickets of silk tassel, solal, and wax myrtle, and then turn a corner and emerge into a grove of trees so contorted by the elements, it appears as though I might have stumbled upon a forest cauldron dance frozen in time, as if my sudden presence has caused the trees to hold their form until I finish passing through. Beyond the perspectives, I found great inspiration here as well. The Oregon coast is regularly battered by wind, rain, and surf. It absorbs some of the most brutal onslaughts that the elements have to offer with reliable, historic consistency. And as long as there have been human memories to detail such thing, it has exuded uncommon beauty and resilience in the face of it all. This place is home to some of the most wondrous and life-affirming landscapes I've ever laid eyes on. Perhaps not despite what it goes through, but because of it. I would end up calling the small town of Wheeler home for 8 months before finally moving into a more permanent residence, still on the coast, about a half hour down the road near the town of Tillamook. At this juncture in my life, it feels somewhere between compelling and critical to be near the elk and the salmon, where the rivers, mountains, and ocean converge, where my favorite trees of fragrant needles and flat leaves connect the sand to the soil. Here, there is life and abundance that is impossible not to be touched or influenced by. I find beauty, inspiration, meaning, perspective, and purpose every day here. It's where I belong, for now anyway. Aside from the powers of Mother Nature, I have no idea what may or may not be at play or have a hand in all this, as I implied earlier. However, I will admit, I feel like I've been cared for and helped along on this journey in ways I don't understand, and I don't have to. What matters is that the journey continues, and it got underway with a simple act of kindness. It turned out to be a lifeline, a sanctuary, a home base for healing, and a return to hope in an unassuming cozy corner in Wheeler, Oregon, labeled Room 5. I would like to conclude this evening's presentation with a little uplift. A little something that provides a glimmer of hope. And even though every word of every essay is definitely heartfelt and true this evening, I'm very happy to report that every word of this next essay is true. This is called Finally. Today, for the first time, trail-triggered memories of Kara weren't accompanied by instant sorrow, but rather a few wry smiles and warm nostalgia. We used to get a laugh at trail-side benches that provided views of absolutely nothing. We understood that in all probability, the benches in question earned their placement based on the distance between the last available place to sit or recent elevation gain, but still, you can angle the thing towards an open space or even place it 25 yards further along where there's an actual view. I digress. Anyway, I saw one of those benches on today's hike, and in my head, I could hear her giving that bench and those responsible for it where it resides a good-natured ration of shit. And remember those haunting wind-blown trees I described earlier? Those were her absolute favorites. She would occasionally gasp with delight whenever we would enter a grove of those contorted trees. I could hear her gasp a few times today, and that made me smile. I smiled in the outdoors again, finally. I smiled instead of crying at a memory of Kara, finally. And when I went to bed that night, I slept through the entire night, finally. That's not to say it's going to happen tomorrow. If I had to guess, it probably won't. But all of those things finally did happen. I imagine that my memories of Kara will possess at least a tinge of bittersweet for some time to come. But it's a moment like this, today, that gives me hope that that meter will continue to push further toward the more saccharine side of that bittersweet scale. And if not again tomorrow, perhaps with some degree of increasing regularity from here out. Speaking of tomorrow, I wonder if there's a park in the area I could visit. Thank you guys for being here. So, yeah, thanks for hanging in with that. A couple of things, and please, I know I picked a weird day to actually have this live because one of the things I write about is my mother's cognitive decline. I'm taking care of my mom now to a certain degree, and we use humor to deal with this. It's just the way our family works, and dark humor sometimes. And so I write humorous essays about my mother, and this one happens to be The Annals of My Mind. That is the title of the essay. I apologize. She mispronounced it one day, and I got a big laugh out of it. So there's a whole essay about it. But anyway, this is my Substack platform. So after the loss, I was unable to write for work at all. I was hoping I could. I was hoping I could dive into another guidebook project, but I could not write directions to a trail or describe the 5 best cheeseburgers in Seaside, Oregon for the life of me. I just could not. I was writing this stuff incessantly. And so I started sharing those things on Facebook and with friends and family, and a lot of people were getting some benefit or in some way, shape, or form from these essays and implored me to maybe share them beyond my circle of friends. And I wanted to do that, but I also needed to eat. And so the thought of monetizing or benefiting from the loss of the love of my life felt greasy to me and something that I would not do. But what this does, this platform called Substack, which a writer friend told me about because I don't keep up with such things, this allowed me the opportunity to put all of those grief writings, everything I read to you tonight and other numerous similar ones about grieving outside. I can put this here and they're free for anyone forever in perpetuity. you can just go to adamsawyer.substack.com, and the name of it is called Collecting Sunsets. And in the middle at the top there's a little archive tab, and all of those essays are here. And everything that has to do with addiction and recovery or with grieving and healing in the outdoors is free. They're all free forever. And if you want to share them with someone, you can click on it and get a link and share it with someone who you think it might help or be pertinent to them. But the other thing that this allows me to do is put all the rest of my other writing, which is sometimes just observations about nature, sometimes travel, sometimes humorous essays about my mom going bonkers. All of those things are behind a paywall or for a subscription for $5 a month. So you can not have a subscription at all and go to this page anytime you want and go read those. You can be a free subscriber, and then you get a new essay shows up in your mailbox every other week about grieving and healing in the outdoors. Or if you just want to support the cause, or you want to get 2 additional essays a month, you can be a $5 a month subscriber. So there are options on there, but if you take nothing else away from this, know that you can go to adamsawyer.substack.com anytime you want. It costs nothing, and you can read those essays about healing and grieving outside. And that's all I got for you. I do have some books if anyone wants to check those out. They're $20 a pop. I have a little tappy tap if you have a card, or if you got 20 in cash or check, whatever. Other than that, I'm happy to hang out and chat with anyone that might want to chat. Otherwise, I release you back to the streets of West Lynn. Thank you guys again very much for coming out. I appreciate it greatly.